now.
Hello, everyone. Yet once again, it's another day of fresh grace and mercy. This is the Guilt, Grace, Gratitude podcast, sponsored by Logos Bible Software, where we bridge the gap to Reformed Christian theology for your listening pleasure. And today we're doing a book club episode with Tim Challies, and he wrote the book called Seasons of Sorrow, The Pain of Loss, and the Comfort of God, and it is published by Zondervan. So if you go to our show notes and click that Zondervan link, please pick up a copy of this book. And other reminders on our show notes, there's a link to find the closest Reformed or confessional churches near your area. Click that link, type in your zip code, find those churches. There's also information on how to contact Peter or myself through social media, which is either on Twitter or Instagram. The handle is the same for both. It's at guiltgracepod. We have daily communication interaction going on there. You can stay up to date what we have going on our show and commentary and anything like that. We're also on YouTube. These conversations are automatically uploaded to YouTube and organized pretty well. So even for this episode, you can click the playlist button and see the book clubs and see this one come up. So go to YouTube and subscribe to us. You can also email us. Yes, we have an email address just like 100% of the population. So it's guiltgracepod@gmail.com. And you heard me mention Bridge Builder. Our main bridge builder sponsor is Logos Bible Software. So you'll hear some words from them, and halfway through the show, some words from some of our other sponsors as well. And if you are able and willing, and feel free to click that Patreon link, and there's different levels of giving if you want to help us out with our growing podcast. So I'll let Peter further introduce Tim Challies.
Yeah, we have Tim Challies, who is a pastor, noted speaker, and author of numerous articles. He's also a pioneer in the Christian blogosphere. Tens of thousands of people visit challies.com each day, which is almost as big as our podcast. That's a joke. Nobody's going to laugh at that, but making it one of the most widely read and recognized Christian blogs in the world. Tim is the author of several books, including Visual Theology and Epic, and all around the world journey through Christian history. He and his family reside near Toronto, Ontario, and it's a pleasure having you on our show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, yeah. So maybe first thing, how are things going in Toronto? How's life as a Challies?
Yeah, things are going well here. It's a good place to live. Endlessly fascinating city. Through the pandemic, we saw one of the main things that Canada is known for, which is immigration, sort of slow down a little bit. But that pipeline has been opened up again. And so what that means for churches is that we keep having new people moving from different parts of the world and integrating right into our church. So I've always found that a particularly fascinating part of being a Christian here in Toronto. And it's been just a joy to really every 3 or 4 weeks now, just to welcome a new individual or new family into the church from somewhere else. It's a great thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, we have kind of the opposite problem in California, where you don't have a exodus coming in. We have an exodus going out. So we're hoping like people will start coming to our churches, but it seems like people are going out of our churches to other places, which I'm sure you've heard from before as well. So maybe if our audience doesn't know who you are, haven't followed your blog or whatever it is, maybe if you can let our audience know a little bit about yourself, your background, and then how you came to what you do now.
Sure, yeah. So I live in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I've lived here pretty well my whole life. Married to Aileen. We've been married for 24 years. I have a son who's in heaven that I believe will come up again in our conversation. Mm-hmm. And 2 daughters, one who's married and lives in Louisville, Kentucky with her husband, and one who is in high school and lives right here with us for another couple of years anyways, before she heads to school. I'm a pastor or elder, if you will, depending whether you're Baptist or Presbyterian, how you understand these words, at Grace Fellowship Church here in town. And I've been eldering there for 10 or 12 years or something. Having been raised in this area, I was raised primarily in the Dutch Reformed tradition. So I have pretty deep grounding in the Dutch Reformed tradition. My parents were Presbyterians, but I became Baptist. So I've got a little bit, I was baptized Anglican too. So I got a little bit of all these different traditions in me, and have always loved and appreciated Reformed theology and adhere to it myself.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm in the URC, so I've been grafted into that Dutch Reformed branch, and I'm reminded of that pretty often, that I'm a Gentile grafted into the Dutch Reformed branch.
We were URC for a number of years. When
okay.
my wife and I were married, it was into a URC church, and we were part of that until it came time to baptize our firstborn child. And we suddenly realized, oh shoot, we're not so sure about every aspect of what it means to be URC. But that's for a different podcast.
Okay, not all of us have perfect theology yet. It'll take some.
Not yet.
It'll take some time.
We are all works in progress.
This is right. Yeah. I was also going to ask too, how on earth have you been married for 24 years? Because you look younger than me.
I don't know. I mean, I got married when I was 21, 45-ish now. We just celebrated our 24th anniversary.
Okay.
So the Lord's been very kind to us. It's been a good haul. We still love one another, still enjoy one another, and are looking forward to many more years, should the Lord will it.
Awesome.
Peter, people still look young in their 40s.
Yeah, well, some people do.
See, some do. Yeah.
Peter gives me a hard time because
this is a veiled joke against Nick. People know that we'll joke against each other, and so they'll get the reference. I hope. Or else they're just like staring at me blankly. It's like, why is he still making jokes?
I'm almost 40, so I'll be 40 next year. So.
And Nick looks all of 40.
No way. I look way younger than 40.
It's that mustache.
Yeah.
So yeah, if those who are looking this book and this new book, I know you've had a couple other books before this as well, Seasons of Sorrow, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is a result of a really terrible loss. And you talked about it a little bit with your son that you suffered in November 2020. So as much as you're comfortable letting our audience know what happened.
Yeah, Nick, our firstborn child, only son, was a student at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He was well underway in his studies there. He was doing the combined undergraduate and graduate concurrent degree, and really dreamed of being a pastor back in Canada, very committed to coming back here, and just wanted to pastor a small, out-of-the-way kind of country church was, I think, his great dream. He is just newly engaged to Ren. They were just looking forward to us starting life together. And he and the group from his hall went out to play a game, and just very suddenly he collapsed, and his heart stopped, and fellow students and paramedics who were called in, even a passing doctor, nobody was able to restart his heart, and he went to be with the Lord. And so we had lived, I think, just a very easy life up to that point. We had experienced God's providence largely in ways that were very easy to bear. And then just very suddenly, this great sorrow came upon us. And we just had to decide in that moment what we were going to do with all this good theology we professed, and this great doctrine I had been raised with. Was it going to be true in this moment, or were we going to revamp our theology on the basis of our circumstances?
I'm so sorry, Tim.
Did they ever figure out like what caused this? Was just kind of like a freak out of the ordinary thing, or?
His heart just stopped. They don't know why. It is something that happens surprisingly commonly once you're aware of it. Once you're aware this can happen, and it makes sense. Hearts can stop. It's just unusual for it to stop in somebody who's just 20 years old. But they've not been able to do a whole lot to narrow it in from there. Just these things happen, and I guess their word would be it was a random occurrence, which of course we understand what they're saying by that, but there doesn't seem to be any deep cause behind it.
Yeah. So kind of digging into this a little bit, you've been blogging on Challis.com for many years, and so many of our listeners may know or have been following this for a while. And so you talked about processing your grief through the mode that you seem to be most comfortable in, which is writing. You talk about this as well. So how did writing help you process through some of these emotions?
Yeah. In order to understand that to some degree, I think we got to roll back to November 2020 and just consider the circumstances then, which was early pandemic still in that phase where there's quite a lot of uncertainty. Vaccines didn't exist yet. Borders were closed between almost every country. Canada and the US had this bizarre relationship where you were free to fly back and forth, but absolutely forbidden to drive back and forth, something that really never made a whole lot of sense, but there it was. So the land borders were closed, air borders were open. And this was a context in which Nick passed away. And so writing was, yeah, it's something I do anyways, and something I probably would have done. But in this case, writing was especially important because the people who knew us and loved us and knew and loved Nick were divided by this border that many people could not cross or would not cross. And so a lot of the writing I was doing in the early days was just trying to help people understand what was going on and whether they could be part of a service on the southern side of the border and the northern side of the border. We had a memorial service in Kentucky. We had a funeral service in Toronto, and there was, other than my family, there was nobody, and our pastor, there's nobody who was at both services because of the state of the borders. Non-citizens were typically not allowed to cross back and forth. And so a lot of my writing was processing things, but it was also just providing information. And then, over the years, writing has become the way I think. I don't really know what I believe. I don't really know how to work things out except doing it writing. Some people talk things through, I write things through. And so as I was processing my grief, I was doing so very much through writing.
Yeah. And before Nick's next question, maybe just some background to this. How did you get into writing? How did you get into like kind of processing these things through and both learning and communicating through writing?
Yeah, I mentioned that I was born and raised into the Reformed tradition, and up to the time it came time to baptize our firstborn child, we were in the URC church. Right around that same time, we moved. I got a job, my first real job out of college, and we moved to the town we live in now. And at that time, we changed churches just by necessity. We were too far to drive to our other church. And I ended up leading us into what was really a sort of mainstream Baptist as opposed to a broadly evangelical Baptist church rather than a Reformed Baptist church. And for a while, it was great, especially their focus on evangelism. That just really resonated, having grown up in a tradition that was really not very evangelistic.
Yeah.
For all the Dutch Reformed are known for, I don't think they're known for
not
their
known for
zeal in
evangelizing.
evangelism.
That's for sure. Yeah.
And so I had assumed from that the Reformed faith was unevangelistic, that to be a Reformed Christian meant you didn't really care about evangelism. So I ended up in this broadly evangelical Baptist church. So it was our first experience at Baptist churches, which we loved, and we loved the zeal to reach the lost. But it didn't take us too long to start realizing that there were some pretty significant differences. And that was the time when so many evangelical churches are jumping deep into Rick Warren's works and doing the purpose-driven life, basing their churches on purpose-driven church and so on. And there were some other cultural threads. And I found myself writing my way through that, trying to interpret, okay, here's this new tradition I've landed in. I'm writing my way through it as interpreting what I'm going to do with it. And really what happened was I eventually wrote myself out of that church because I realized that these Reformed convictions really do matter, that I couldn't just chuck them. And that the evangelism in a lot of those churches it was evangelism, but without discipleship, or it was just getting people in for the sake of numbers, but not truly growing them up in the faith. And having been catechized as a kid, as a young adult, I just knew the importance of really deeply grounding ourselves in the faith. And so, yeah, writing was the way I worked all that through. Then along the way, this new Reform, new Calvinism thing, young restless Reformed was growing up, and a lot of people were asking the same questions. And so I sort of inadvertently became one of the early voices of that through the blog.
Yeah, that like you said later on, this the kind of the dual purpose of writing through the loss of your son was both to let your family know what happened, who couldn't make it in, but it's also, you've been doing this for so long. This is what you kind of know of how to process this stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of the writing I did, I made public. A lot of the writing I did not make public. Okay. And so the book that I've just released now contains both parts, some of which was made, some of what I made public is in the book, and some of what I kept private is in the book as well.
Gotcha.
Wow. And I said this before the recording. Thank you so much for your courage to put your story out there. And you were saying how you process your thoughts on paper or keyboard, however you write it down. But thank you for your courage putting it out there, because your story and it's so painful, but it could help a lot of people around the world more than you even realize. And it's, so thank you for sharing your stories,
Yeah.
as hard as that is. So, um, in your own words, this is not a thorough theology of grief, of suffering, but how does the sovereignty of God over all things, especially grief and loss, help us grieve?
Yeah, I've said it often. I'm so thankful to have been grounded in good doctrine, sound doctrine before I went into this time of sorrow.
Yeah.
I would not want to be dealing with deep doctrinal matters in the midst of grief when your emotions are all out of whack and you don't know what to do. Your senses are dulled. There's so much that's going on in those early days. That is not the time to be asking, is God sovereign? Or could this have happened apart from the will of God? Was this Satan sneaking something in that God wasn't prepared for? Or, the questions of open theism, if you will, did this providence somehow catch God by surprise? All these sorts of things. I'm so glad to have worked that out. And, one of the first things I ever had to memorize as a kid was, what is your only comfort in life and death?
Oh
What
yeah.
is it? That I'm not my own, but belong in body and soul, in life and death, to my faithful Savior Jesus
You still
Christ.
got
And
Heidelberg Catechism 1 in your heart.
yeah, exactly. This was the time then to say, am I going to enact that theology? Am I really going to believe this in my time of deepest sorrow? And God's sovereignty is just so incredibly precious. And it was really, I think there were two things that stabilized me in the very early days. One was the knowledge of God's sovereignty, that God is 100% in control. The other thing is that God is good. And if you hold those two things together, this good God is in control. This good God was in control in the giving of my son, and this good God was in control of the taking of my son. He didn't stop being in control, and he didn't stop being good. And so those are sort of the two rocks that I was anchored to, and doing my utmost to anchor my family to as well. So whatever else we believe, whatever else we feel, has to be consistent with a good God who controls all things.
Yeah. Maybe this will help bridge to next question, kind of provide some context. I think a lot of people think, like, listen to sovereignty. It's like, that's great that you believe the sovereignty of God and like that controls all things. But does that actually allow you to like really truly grieve and really truly sorrow when it's like, oh no, God's sovereign over all things, I don't have to worry about this? Is that like held in tension with each other, or how do we think about those two things?
Yeah, I think it allows us to grieve with hope. We don't have to wonder if this escaped God's attention, or as I said before, if Satan pulled one over on God, if he got the upper hand here, as if this is some sort of cosmic battle with ebb and flow, where now Satan's winning and God's winning. And we don't just think that God took a little nap and this happened in some other way. We have to believe that somehow, whatever the cause behind it was the will of God, that this didn't happen apart from his will. And so I think that absolutely then stabilizes us, it anchors us, and it gives us such joy, because if we're believing God for death, we're believing God for resurrection. If we're believing God for salvation, we're trusting him as well then for glorification. And so we can absolutely have great confidence in God. And when we understand God's sovereignty, we understand that this is God's world. Sovereignty is a word of kingship, of ownership. God owns this world. He's king over this world, which means he has the right to take. In his world, he has the right to give. He has the right to take. And we have no right then to say that God has done wrong, to charge him with wrong, or to even really wonder if he's done wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, death doesn't have the final say. That's for sure. I mean, previous to that experience, you kind of doctrinally knew that, right? You knew the story of redemption, and you knew God created life, therefore he will defeat death. And death is that final enemy that God's going to conquer. And on that last day, there will be no tears and no sorrow. And I think that's such a good message you explained for your story, because I think it's a good reminder for us Christians, or people thinking about being Christian, to really don't wait until things are tough to start diving in to asking questions. Do it now, today. Like, you can't go back in time tomorrow and do it, but do it now. Like, start studying the Bible, start studying the Word, understand who God is, because things could be going well, and we'll all will experience heartache and suffering at some point in our life. We don't know if we're going to lose a child or if it's a different type of suffering, but we will experience sufferings. It's inevitable. So it's good that you reminded us to soak in that knowledge even in the good times, because it's gonna help feed us and nourish us during the hard times. Um, but when that suffering hits and that grief hits, and you find yourself in that moment, where you're like, I can't believe this is happening right now. It's kind of out of the body experience, right? And it does take, like, if we're honest, it does take a hit on your faith. And so that's why I was going back to, like, it's good that you built up your relationship with God prior to that. So there is some foundation there, but it is going to, it does take a hit on faith a little bit. So how did you, or do you, wrestle with the questions many of us are all too familiar with hearing? And I know you hinted at this earlier. So some people, and it's okay if you've asked this too, like, God, why would you do this? Or God, you took him too early. How could you do that? You're a good God. Why would you do that? So maybe help us with that.
Yeah, you use the term "our faith takes a hit." I think you should expect that your faith will be renovated. Perhaps I heard someone use that term a couple of days ago. His faith was renovated in his time of sorrow, his time of loss, but it wasn't undermined. It wasn't harmed. It wasn't destroyed. He just realized he had assumed some of the wrong things. And I think there's a little bit of prosperity theology in each one of us, or a little bit of I don't know what it is. If I do this for God, he'll do that for me. I guess just pure legalism. But this idea that if I'm doing the right things for God, I'm living my life for his glory, I've got my theology down, I'm living well, then God's just going to keep giving me good things. And yet sometimes God just takes for no obvious reason, for no discernible part of his plan. It's not obvious why he's done it. And so we're just left then having to trust, and it does then renovate our faith. And in the end, what we're doing is simply trusting. We put our faith in the Lord Jesus for salvation. We're putting our faith in him for the circumstances of our life as well. And we're just deeply trusting that he's doing something good, that he's up to something. I haven't spent a lot of time on the why questions, because I think I've got a pretty good assessment that I'm not likely to get answers. And even if I did get answers, would those really help me? What if God said, I took your son, but look, this other person came to faith through it? I mean, I think I would say, I don't really like that math. I'd rather have my son back. So I don't know that God's likely to tell us. And I don't know that we're likely to even be able to really see and appreciate it, because God isn't up to just one thing in this world. God's always up to so many things. There's all these threads that are woven together. And in eternity, I think God can pull back the curtain on that and just let us see what he's been doing, and we'll marvel at it. But I don't think we have the eyes or perspective right now to see it. And so we've really been trying to distinguish carefully between why God did it and how God is using it. And so why God did it, God owns the answer to that. And I just don't think it's likely he's ever going to tell me on this side of the grave. And that's 100% fine. God doesn't owe me answers. I don't have the right to say, God, you need to tell me. I won't be content until you tell me why you did this. I'm going to trust him with it. But how God is using it as a separate matter, we've taken a lot of joy in seeing how God has used it. And maybe the clearest thing he's done is just really helped us to grow in our faith, and really shown us how to be kinder and more compassionate, and given us opportunities to serve others in their griefs. I don't want to say that's why he did it. That's cheapening next death to say that's why God did it. Yep. But it's certainly one of the means how God has used it.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And we also know, I mean, if people are familiar with the Bible at all, if our listeners, hopefully they've been encouraged and learning the Bible through our show and through your blog as well, where the Bible is not silent on suffering. It's not silent on grief. It's not silent on any type of like worldly calamity or death. It is real, and it talks through this stuff. Our patriarchs, the kings, psalmists, Christ himself suffered himself profoundly and suffered in his life profoundly. So were some of these stories or psalms of men or some of these themes. We talked about sovereignty. We talked about the ultimate hope that we have in death and God's glory over all things. But is kind of how like the Bible talks about suffering. It's not like kind of this ethereal principles, morals of living, kind of happy-go-lucky, but it's real about this and what this is going into. How did the Bible, these stories and some of these themes help you in this time?
Yeah, well, certainly we need to begin at the cross as the greatest possible example of suffering, the greatest possible incident of suffering. And we, as Christians, believe that there's great meaning there, that God was not up to nothing, but God was up to something, and that what happened there had been ordained by God himself to accomplish a very good thing. And if we then take that and work downward from there, here's the greatest possible example of suffering, bringing the greatest amount of good, then we can look at much smaller examples of suffering and assume they'll bring good as well. I think that's a fair assumption. And so our faith is a very cross-centered faith. And when we really focus on the cross, absolutely, then we can come to kind of a lot of hope and a lot of confidence that God is doing good things through this. He does promise, after all, to work all things for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. The other great resource we have at our disposal is church history, and hopefully we're grounded in that as well. And it occurred to me that this loss happened shortly after I'd done this book you referenced earlier, Epic book and DVD series, where I traveled the world looking for stories of Christians and encountered some stories of grievous loss and suffering. And as we look back at the history of the church, we see we should expect that God's people will suffer. They should suffer losses. It's unusual today, quite unusual, to suffer the loss of a child. We can generally assume that that our children will outlive their parents. It's the way it tends to go today. But you're only going back a couple generations before you see that was not the assumption. People assumed that at least some of their children would die before they did. And so there's great friends to be found in history, great treasures of the Christian faith we can go back to and really find fraternity, real Christian fellowship with those who have gone before and suffered these losses. So between scripture and this long 2,000-year legacy of Christianity, we have wonderful resources at our disposal. And that's not even to speak about our creeds and catechisms and all the wonderful answers they provide.
Yeah. Before I get into the next question, you talked about this and it struck me. And it's something I've thought about and trying to ground in others that I've talked to. That kind of not even just the need, but I think the requirement of grounding our kids in good theology, grounding our kids in catechisms, and not waiting until their life goes haywire or they haven't been trained, so they hit college. Now everything kind of goes up in the air. What is maybe not the purpose, but why is this so necessary to ground ourselves in this versus kind of what typically happens, which is we hit these sufferings and it does take a hit on us actually and profoundly?
Yeah. The Bible says nothing about catechisms, so I think we have to be careful that we don't elevate them to the position I think sometimes they can take in the Reformed faith, where bad Christians don't catechize their kids, good Christians do. However, we're definitely before the Lord responsible to raise our children in the discipline and instruction of the Lord, which primarily means taking them to church, integrating them to whatever degree we can in the local church, and then just really calling upon our children to put their faith in the Lord and to not just depend upon their church attendance or the faith of their parents, but to make their parents' faith their own faith and to truly love the Lord. And along the way, we'll of course want to teach them and instruct them in the truths of the Christian faith. And one of the wonderful resources we have available to us is this whole category called catechism, simply questions and answers that raise questions of the Christian faith and answer them. And traditionally, at least over the last couple hundred years, kids have been forced to, by their parents or pastors, to memorize those questions and answers. And in that way, just to have this deep theological grounding stored away in their hearts. And I, like most kids, hated every minute of it.
Yeah.
And yet I'm so thankful on the other side of it
Yeah.
to have done that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And though we suffer, and some suffer tremendously in this life, and how does both the real language used in the Bible and the hope God gives us in his son Jesus Christ give us that hope that this is temporary suffering? And we see suffering all over the Bible, like Peter was saying, from to just name a few. In the Old Testament, Job, and then in the New Testament, Paul's words saying this is light and momentary, preparing us for the glory to come. And just based on our Christian faith compared to other faiths out there, the God of other religions can't really answer theologically the question of suffering. How does zeroing in on maybe the gospel of what Jesus Christ did give us hope?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's so important to understand the Christian faith as that narrative that you sort of outlined there, that begins with creation and then goes into humanity's fall, but then goes to redemption and then toward new creation, if you will. And so we understand that God is up to something, and what he's up to is glorious. And the fall, all that pain and horror was of our own making. But what happens beyond is of his making. He's the one who saves us, and he's the one who then brings us to himself and eradicates all pain, all evil, all suffering, sorrow, tears. And so when we truly understand what God's up to, I think we can just have tremendous confidence that the very same faith that saves us is the faith the faith that's a gift of God that saves us is the very same faith that will carry us all the way to when we do see the end of all that's troublesome to us, and the presence of only ever what's wonderful and beautiful. So we have tremendous hope, and we just need to have the faith to keep looking over the horizon and to trust that what God describes there is real and is true. We of all people have such tremendous hope, and that's grounded, of course, in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. If he was still a dead Savior, we'd have no hope whatsoever. But he's a risen and living Savior who promises that just as he rose, he's the down payment, the deposit on our resurrection. Mm-hmm. Just as he rose, so will we, and we will experience life with him forever. So without that hope, yeah, we wouldn't have much, would we? We could maybe content ourselves that we have some meaning or purpose in this life, just shrug our shoulders with what comes beyond, but that's not where God leads us.
Yeah. Before Nick's last question, maybe more personal for you. What you talked about, this kind of refining or strengthening your faith. So what did you see? Like, how did you experience from knowing these truths, knowing how this affects us in our daily life, but then actually experiencing it? Like, how did that grow you?
Yeah. First, I want to say that we can talk about theology, and that's great. Theology is so important, and I'm so grateful to have had good doctrine in place. That doesn't mean we're not going to weep and cry and just groan and moan under the weight of what we've gone through. And this experience has taught me to weep in a whole new way. I was never much of a crier, but I'm a crier now, and I'm okay with it. And our theology doesn't take away our pain, but it does give us hope. It does give us meaning, and just gives us great confidence. So sorry, I said that and I forgot what you asked me.
No, yeah, and I think that's a good point, because that's something we haven't really dove into, and I think that's helpful to kind of bridge into this. We can like really, actually, truly, like you said, be sorrowful and grieve and not act like this doesn't matter, or like, oh, I just believe in God's sovereignty, I'm just going to kind of brush over the stuff that actually happened in my life. But God's sovereignty, God's glory, Christ's resurrection actually allows you to deeply go through this stuff, because you know where this is going to leave you on the end, not in spite of where it's going to leave you. So I think that's more or less what you're saying.
Yeah, you got it.
Before Nick's. So the question was, how did this not reform, but like kind of strengthen you after your son's death in the faith? And what did this teach you? Not like that theology hadn't taught you before, but what did this teach you that maybe, not saying that this is the purpose of it whatsoever, but how did you experience your growth after this?
Sure. Well, going through a situation like this, you're going to, I think, either just draw closer to God or just kick him to the curb and run away, right? Your faith won't be the same after you go through great loss. And that's true for all of us, just depending on what loss it is. It can be a, loss of a spouse, loss of a child, whatever it is, or even just coming to, terminal illness in your own self and having to think through the state of your own soul. But we're not unaffected by these things. The question is, are we going to, in our losses, draw closer to the Lord, or are we going to run away from him? And then the other thing is, are we going to interpret theology through our emotions, or are we going to subject our emotions to our theology? And Christian doctrine says you can weep and cry, but Christian doctrine says you can't rage against God like he's done something wrong, or you can weep, but you can't weep without hope. There's no reason to weep without hope. You have hope. And so it's not a hopeless cry of somebody who just can't see any good or can't see any purpose in it. It's the meaningful cry of one who says, this hurts, but I know the Lord is up to something. And so I think both of those have been very important to me, just understanding. I think another thing that was really important to understand is that joy and sorrow don't cancel out one another. They don't negate one another. And I in the book liken them to two streams that flow through the same valley, and these two meandering streams, they don't ever flow into one another and become one stream that's this middle emotion or something. We're joyful and we're sorrowful. We're praising God and we're weeping in agony at the same time. And I've learned that and really come to appreciate that God doesn't demand we let go of either one.
That's really helpful.
Yeah, that was helpful to remind us to just reminding us to point back to Christ, just knowing that, he's our elder brother, our savior, our God incarnate, and he wept. He wept when his friend Lazarus died. He experienced sorrow and on the cross, and he did not hide his emotions either. And he knows firsthand the experience of being human and knowing pain and crying. And so that's a beautiful thing. And that just, what you were saying kind of made me, remember that. And of course, Jesus has hope because he knows how this is all going to play out and end. He already knows he's going to conquer death as the last enemy, but he still wept when his friend Lazarus died. And he still felt the pain when John the Baptist was beheaded. So there's a really personal understanding Christ has with us.
And he cried to God, even though he knows the sacrifice he's making for us.
Absolutely. That was like the pinnacle there. He's empathetic to an infinite degree to us. So thank you for that. So as we conclude, how are you hoping what you wrote may affect your readers when suffering inevitably comes our way?
Yeah. One of the things I guess you quoted me earlier saying that this is not a thorough theology of grief. I didn't write a book that was meant to say, here's what the Bible says about grief. There are some books like that, and they're wonderful books. I'm grateful we have them. Didn't feel the need to write another one. My book is more just one person's account of a journey through grief. It's almost a travelogue, if you will, through that first year. And so what I'm hoping people will gain is first just see the urgency, see an example of how a believer thinks and what we're feeling as we go through that time of deep trauma. And then also hopefully just see how we can apply God's promises, and see that God will be true. He is true to his every promise, even in our most difficult circumstances. And I very much hope there's something here for people who are enduring the loss of a child, but also just for any of us as we're going through whatever sorrows we experience. There's every sorrow is unique, but there's in the same time, there's a whole lot of overlap between our sorrows, a whole lot that's in common. So whether it's the loss of a child or the loss of a job or the loss of health, there's so much that's in common. So I think any of our stories of suffering or sorrow can apply to others. So very much hoping that others will find it useful and just draw them closer to the Lord and give them deeper confidence in his purposes, even in our sorrow.
Awesome. Yeah. And before we're done, I don't know if there's anything we missed that you wanted to kind of drive home, or something that you really want to leave our listeners with and your readers with, to say, hey, this is not the end. You have hope. You have the cross. Suffering is real. Pain is real. It's rough, but not without hope. Is there anything that you want to conclude with?
Yeah, I mean, I think exactly just what you said. This isn't the end. We in our times of sorrow can grieve like Christians. And honestly, on that very first evening, we had just learned that Nick had gone to be with the Lord. I took my wife by the shoulders, looked her in the eye, and said, "We can do this." And I really believed we could do this because we've got the Spirit indwelling us. We've got the Word of God at our beck and call just to rely on. We've got the church surrounding us, helping us, comforting us in our afflictions. And so we have all we need to endure our sorrows and our joys in a distinctly Christian way, to give God all the glory, to rely on him, and to emerge from our time of sorrow loving him even more than when we went in. So I really think only Christianity really offers us that hope, that we can emerge from the valley of the shadow of death, smiling, joyful, praising God, loving him even more than when he let us in.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, well, Tim, thank you so much for writing this, for your writing ministry overall, for processing this, and like Nick said, being vulnerable, being open, letting people into your story for that first year after following grief. Because I think so many people do follow with that grief, but they're like, well, like, does Christianity allow me to think these things and feel these things? And like, what actually gives me hope for some of this stuff? Or those just looking in and like, I don't even know how to deal with my grief. I don't even know how to deal with my sorrow. And maybe they look at this like, well, maybe I can give this a try. I can look at who Jesus is and see the hope that he gives out for me. But thank you for writing this. Thank you again for everything that you've done. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.